two senior Kenyans and very respected Kenyans. I'll give them a chance to have a final one. We'll have Brian Kagoro, who represents OSF, and he had prepared quite well to say a few remarks. And then after that, I will then come to Honorable Martha Karua and finish with the Honorable Musioka. Please indulge us for the time. Kindly keep it to 3 minutes. Kindly. Caroli, let's appreciate the Caroli.
Thank you very much, but 3 minutes will be difficult after the mood my friend Honorable Kimini has set in the House. Your Excellency Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka, welcome. Honorable Martha Karua, welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I start to speak not as a member of Parliament for Super South, but as the chair of Constitutional Implementation Oversight Committee of the National Assembly. I think the rubric of discussion we have had today is by one word, accountability. So maybe you'd like to hear from me what as CIOC we are doing to enhance accountability. It's quite unfortunate that the Auditor General has left, but I want to congratulate her and assure of our support as a committee, because we think together with the controller of budget, we have two fine ladies doing very good work for the Republic of Kenya. As a committee, we've noted about 4 issues that really affect the accountability institutions. Those are the Chapter 15 institutions. We have 10 constitutional commissions and 2 independent offices. One is limited funding for constitutional offices and independent offices, these constitutional commissions. The lack of funding is actually affecting the ability to get sufficient and quality staff, but also limiting their activities. Article 249, sub-article 3 of our Constitution says that Parliament shall allocate adequate resources to these offices and that their budgets shall be separate votes. What we have realized in the budget-making process, these constitutional committees, constitutional institutions and the independent offices are lumped under sector working groups, which have ceilings and which in the long run affects the monetary allocations to these constitutional commissions. So to give them adequate funding and to make them independent, we have recommended and we have tabled a report. I've tabled 4 reports in 4 months since I became chair before the House. One of the recommendations is that in the budget-making process, we take out the accountability institutions from sector working groups so that their budget lines are independent and that they are not starved of money. That is one that we have recommended. The second thing we have noticed is weak implementation of their recommendations, like the Auditor General said. Last week, I did present another report, which is now going to be tied to the implementation committee, about how to actualize the recommendations of accountability institutions that they make to the House, so that their implementations, their recommendations, observations can be turned into actions that improve accountability in our country. We have also noted that there's a lot of interference in the constitution of these commissions, in the way the members are being appointed. I did participate in the original recruitment for the 10 constitutional commissions over 10 years ago. But today, what we have noticed is a lot of recycling of politicians into these commissions. And I think there's a problem there. So we are trying to change the law to make sure if I lose my seat, my first port of call is not a constitutional commission, so that we keep the rigorous recruitment process and independence of the members who go there. Because you see clearly there are cases of trade-offs where a politician is put into a commission as a trade-off that his supporters may vote for somebody. I mean, you saw that recently, even in the by-election that we have, if you are keen. So we are trying to deal with that issue. The final difficulty we have seen is executive overreach into the operations of these commissions. A good example was the thing that was created for compensation of victims of post-election violence, which the court declared constitutional. That is the work of an existing constitutional commission, and that work should be left there. There have also been some proposals we have done to the PFM Act, which are supposed to enhance equity and accountability. There's already on the floor of the House a proposed amendment to the Public Finance Act that will create a sub-article You remember when the budget is being prepared, especially on the side of expenditure, members of parliament don't have a summary of where the expenditures are going. So you have to keep looking for addendums, annexures, and the rest of them. We are now proposing that in the PFM Act, the Treasury, as well as the Parliamentary Budget Office, will review annual estimates to ensure that their form and content contain a sector-wide informative summary of the development projects proposed per sub-county in terms of the administrative units. So that if the Ministry of Roads come to Parliament and say we have budgeted 200 billion for new roadworks, they will break it down to the sub-counties. So you can clearly see how it has been divided across the entire Republic. Whether it is Ministry of Water, whether it is Ministry of Energy. In other words, if you see the development mosaic of Kenya, there's been over-concentration in certain areas to the detriment of other areas. This is supposed to deal with equity. And the other proposal, which is the final one before I talk about something else, to the PFM Act, is where we are proposing that for shareable revenue that will be going to counties, we want it to be modeled on something most of the civil society don't like, but which is the only fund which is working in this republic, which is called the NGCDF. We want to be modeled on something very simple. 30% of the shareable revenue to counties will be ring-fenced for recurrent expenditure. The other balance of 70 will be distributed to counties based on specific project lines with codes, so that there'll never be any pending bills when the money goes to the counties. They'll not present a budget for health, but when they receive the money, they take the funding to funerals and hiring cheering crowds, as they do. So we will ring-fence development expenditure on the shareable revenue of county governments. Those are the kind of accountability measures we are trying to institute as a committee. But finally, let me also say one or two things about the Safaricom issue and give some historical perspectives that many people may not know. I want to start with just comparing the government proposal of divestiture from Safaricom and that of Kenya Pipeline. And because IMF and the World Bank are here, that's why I've chosen to speak about it, so that they may interrogate these things further, because they have a hand in this. The KPC divestiture program is on the basis of an initial public offering. The Safaricom one is on the basis of enhanced strategic sale. These two models of sale are supposed to deal with different requirements. The Kenya Pipeline should, in my view, have been sold on the basis of strategic sale, so as to get a strategic investor with the wherewithal, financial wherewithal, and technical know-how to create new business streams for Kenya Pipeline. To, in other words, reticulate gas. For example, put a pipeline for gas from Mombasa to Nairobi to the rest of the country and reticulate gas into buildings. That requires a lot of investments, that you need an expert to do that, somebody in that sector. Why am I raising this? Because I will explain to you why the option that has been chosen presents opportunity for state capture. Kenya Pipeline, we should have extended the pipeline into Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda. We've lost that opportunity. We only have Southern Sudan and Ethiopia. The Nairobi Stock Exchange cannot marshal enough resources to give to Kenya Pipeline to reticulate gas, to do a gas pipeline, to go into other lines of business, and to extend to Southern Sudan and Ethiopia. So there's a problem by that choice. And IMF and World Bank, I request you hear us. On the Safaricom issue, we already have a strategic partner, which is Vodafone. So why, in a country where only 1% of the population have access to 78% of our financial resources, why would we concentrate more of that resource into Vodafone hands instead of democratizing ownership of Safaricom through the Nairobi Stock Exchange to most people, so that Kenyans can deal with that inequality? Now, this is because of the original sin of Safaricom. When Vodafone first came into this country, there was no bidding. to start up Safaricom, like Airtel did. You remember we had a bid for Airtel? Who ever had Vodafone bidding? There was a sweetheart deal between the elites of the time and Vodafone that created Safaricom. And what happened there? 10% of the shares of Safaricom were reserved to a company called Mobitelea. 10% was reserved, not 5. There were 10. Was reserved for a private company called Mobitelea, which was never declared here. But because of the requirements of London Stock Exchange, Vodafone declared Safaricom, their shareholding in Safaricom was actually less by 10%. In England, that's how we got to know there was a company called Mobitelea. Because when these sweet deals are transacted, there are two things that politicians scheme. One is called finder's fee. So the people who do these transactions enter into a deal with the investors, and because you brought the deal on the table, you ask for a certain amount, and you are paid. Basically, it is a bribe. They call it give it a good name, finder's fee. But then there's something also they call free carry, which is the shareholding. So you are given shares which you don't pay for. So the fundamental question that we need to ask today is what happened to the Mobitelea shares? And the World Bank and IMF, as because you are working on this transaction with the government, you should ask these questions. It is no secret that a company called Mobitelea, which was a front for Kenyan politicians of the time, owned 10% of Safaricom. Vodafone declared it in London Stock Exchange. It is a fact. So we should also ask ourselves, the current transaction, is there another element of Mobitelea? Come on, let's be factual. Why is it being hidden? Treasury mandarins did not know about this transaction until a few days ago. They did not know. It was structured elsewhere and presented to them. So we need to ask ourselves, why is Vodacom always interested in opaque, non-transparent transactions? Have you ever heard of Safaricom bidding for frequencies in this republic? They have never. Airtel bidded for their frequencies. What happens in Kenya, the telecom frequencies which are state-owned and which are supposed to be auctioned by the National Treasury to raise revenues for government are given to individuals who then sell them over to Safaricom. So you can, because of your political connections, you can go and get a frequency for 20 million and sell to Safaricom for 2 billion. But if you floated that particular frequency in open market, the Treasury would get 10 billion, 15 billion. So we need to ask ourselves these questions on this transaction and just be forthright with Kenyans and not be politicians who beat about the bush. There is something wrong with this transaction in Safaricom. Thank you.